getting the NCAA instated and getting that started. And Mr. Delazzini was also involved with setting up practical methods of treatment for athletes that were injured.
One of the themes I forgot to mention earlier is that New Mexico has been a leader in athletic training in many, many ways in the country. I'm not talking about in the state and in the region. I'm talking about in the country. New Mexico has been at the forefront in many things. John was a member of the first NATA. If you read Matt's book, there are 2 NATAs. There was a National Athletic Trainer Association. It died during World War II because there couldn't be too many athletic trainers at that time. There wasn't much sports at that time. Everybody was busy fighting. But the early Athletic Trainer Association, John was a member, and here's his card from 1938. He was senior member. He had no formal training, but he had an interest, and he hung around enough to have a little, it wasn't like they had a certification test at the time. He just kind of met people and knew, and then he started going to the meeting or whatever happened. But that died in the late 30s, early 40s.
It was 1941 prior to us going to World War II.
So he was the first, but the first person that was hired as an athletic trainer was Ed Pinlings at UNM. And Ed came from my state. He played football at Washington State University. Yeah, go Cruces. And somehow got some experience in training at Eastern Washington University, and then moved down to Albuquerque in 1950. And Ed has many new athletic trainers at any setting, high school, college. They didn't have a facility, so we got this building, and we'll give you this little closet or this little whatever. And that's
it actually was found in the center of Johnson Gym when they first built it, and it was off the main floor, but then it went down into this long, dark, dreary tunnel, and then it ended up being in the basement of Johnson Gym. But they did have a whirlpool. They actually had 2 whirlpools. One was inset in the ground, and the other one was this metal tub with a fan in it. And then they had a couple tables, and then there was an office for Ed to do all of his paperwork.
Older athletic trainers know that most athletic trainers are in the bowels of a building.
Well, they start there.
Ed ended up being inducted in the NATA Hall of Fame in 1980, so there's one of the first leaders right there. And at MSU, the first real athletic trainer was C.R. Bickerstaff, and he was hired by kind of a big deal at the time. Warren Woodson was a big deal here as a football coach. He was a big timer. In the 50s and 60s, MSU football rocked. They were very successful. They were undefeated in 1960, won the Sun Bowl. They were big, and Woodson was kind of both revered and feared. Mm-hmm. But he hired Rick in 51 or 55. If you know campus at all, Williams Gym is now the art building. It's right off of University. It's a little tiny square building, and it was a terrible little tiny cracker box gym. Later on, Lou Henson became the basketball coach at NMSU, moved his games to Las Cruces High School, and not where it is presently, the old Las Cruces High School, because that gym was bigger.
It's now the courthouse. Was it? It's that court unit.
Yeah. But it was a tiny little building, and they gave him a janitor's closet. Hey, welcome to the program. Here's this tiny little room, and there's nothing in there, of course. And as early athletic trainers, he assisted in many duties. I had some communications with him in 2006 before he passed away, and he said he recruited many of the better athletes. That was one of his jobs, go out on the road and recruit, and that was what Warren Woodson did, was he recruited nationally, and a lot of people didn't do that. And you got to imagine 1950 Las Cruces, okay? It wasn't very big. I don't know if it was 20,000 people. It might not have been 20,000. But these guys from New Jersey and New York and Florida get on a train, because you don't come for a visit back then. You just sign, somebody says they're paying for school, you sign a piece of paper and say, okay, yes sir. They get on a train, you get off, and the dusty old depot down there by High Desert, that'll give you kind of a place reference. They get out there, and I mean, it's kind of like it's sagebrush and tumbleweeds, and they're going, where the hell am I? And what am I getting into? And most of those guys wanted to leave, but they would call home, and mom and dad said, oh no, you're getting school paid for, you're staying. But Rick was also a coach, and you were a jack of all trades back then. That's what you did. In his communications, he said that he made connections with both the Kramer Company and the Johnson & Johnson Company, and that's the beginning of athletic training right there. And Kramer started to do camps. They started to go regionally in the country and do camps, and he had a Kramer camp several times in New Mexico. I don't know who his students were, what became of those students, if any of them became athletic trainers. That's how I got my start.
Yeah.
And you too?
That's where I started too.
Yeah. Back then, that's how you did it. You went to a Kramer camp and you got a couple days of intense lectures, and then you went back to your high school and you were a student trainer. But he is the first member of sports medicine staff ever elected to NMSU's Hall of Fame in 2012. And then Dr. Baker was right after him. And he moved to Iowa State down the road, and he was a Hall of Fame member at Iowa State. And there it is, Charles Bickerstaff. His two sons also were athletic trainers. He had a few students. Usually then there's no curriculum, there's no program or anything like that. You just say, hey, this looks cool. Can I follow you around and learn what you're doing? And that's how it went. And one of them was Frank Randall. Charles Frank Randall was, I think, a local guy, but he went to school, came to NMSU in 58, and started working with Mr. Bickerstaff. And back then, again, there's no licensing, there's no certification, there's none of that stuff. And so, certifications in the 70s?
65, actually.
Okay. I remember. He's the memory. I'm the rambler. So when Bickerstaff left, he said, well, we don't have a trainer. It's not like they're going to go on a hotline and find a bunch of people that are qualified. Hey, we got a student that'll work. And for 2 years as an undergraduate student, he was the head athletic trainer at NMSU. And that's not an uncommon thing. That happened more often than you would think. Happens again in NMSU's history and a few people here. But once he graduated in 62, he got hired, and he was full-time for a couple years. He went to, this is also a telling point, he left NMSU for more money at New Mexico Military School, a much more established school at that time. That was a military school. MacArthur, all kinds of people went there. It was a big deal, even though it's in your town.
Not my town.
And then he went to Idaho. My old buddy Barry up there. So another Northwest connection. But he ended up with kind of, when you knew people like that, it was very much a network kind of thing. You know, Bickerstaff goes to Iowa State, and so did Frank Randall, and he ended up there, and he's also in their Hall of Fame, and he got in the NATA Hall of Fame in '91. There's Chuck, right there. I've talked to him a couple times. He actually comes to town from time to time, or used to come to town for the chili. Can you blame him? He left. There was kind of this deal where athletic trainers got pissed and left right before football started. It happened a couple times. This is the second time in a row at NMSU. And so right before he goes to New Mexico Military, I didn't say NIMI. Oh, I just did. And so NMSU started football. They don't have an athletic trainer. What are we going to do? Warren Woodson is going to mess around here. He's not going to have time to call people. So he talked to some of his football players at the time that he had just recruited in from Texas Junior College and said, hey, any of you guys have someone back there that you knew and trusted. And they said, yeah, we got this student back in Odessa. He was pretty good. Tom Little called him up, said, hey, you want to be the head athletic trainer in New Mexico State University? He said, of course you say yes. You're a student. You know, I get paid to do this now? Of course. So Tom came in '64. He was an undergrad for a couple of years, and then he became a graduate student. And at that time, we were getting a little more successful, mid-60s or late 50s, early 60s. NMSU was on a pretty good. We were football and basketball were doing real well, even baseball too. Presley Askew, and so we had the luxury of bringing in a second grad assistant at the same time. We had 2 grad assistants running this show, and that was Tom Little and George Westbrook. Quick aside story: I met Tom Little my first day of my first National Athletic Trainers annual meeting up in Seattle, Washington. I don't even remember the year, probably like '82. But before we ever registered, my mentor took me to a hotel room, and they were drinking beer and talking and sharing stories, and I was the smart young one and sat there and listened. And then later on I find out, wow, that guy was the guy here, the same Tom Little. He moved on to Chico State and was there for a long, long time, just retired, and he got put in the Chico State Hall of Fame. So you see a pattern going? All these guys are Hall of Famers. We're moving from pioneers to legends now, okay? Because the next 2 gentlemen really set the table for athletic training in this state. And when Ed Billings moved on in 1957, you take it.
Toe Diem was the head athletic trainer for UNM. He was actually in World War II. He was injured in a shrapnel or a bomb attack on Normandy, and he received some shrapnel in his leg. And from that moment, he was discharged, a medical discharge, then moved on to Kansas State. He was actually born in Liberty, Kansas, but he was working at Kansas State for a while. Then he moved off into San Diego, and then he got the job at UNM. Toe is known as the father of athletic training for the state of New Mexico. He is an individual that did not have very many enemies. He spent a lot of time developing and fostering relationships with all sorts of people, and we'll talk about that later. But athletes from way back will come back and tell you that what he did was amazing. One of his first students, and we'll talk about him in a few minutes, but one of his first students was Larry Willard from Santa Fe High. He started the athletic training programs in New Mexico, and that started in the early 1960s. Toe did a couple things that were important for New Mexico. He hosted the first, one of the NAT meetings in Albuquerque.
National meeting.
A national meeting, not a state meeting, but a national meeting. If you can imagine, there were at that time 13,000 athletic trainers coming to Albuquerque, and that was a huge, huge deal. He was inducted into the NATA Hall of Fame in 1976, and in 1990 he was inducted into the NMATA Hall of Fame. He's also inducted into the RMATA Hall of Fame.
First one.
Yeah, he was our first inductee for the New Mexico Athletic Trainers Hall of Fame. He is definitely a leader for national politics as well as state information. He was a chairman of the NATA for a while. That was in 1962 to 1964. 1965, he started the ethics committee. The ethics that we work with today are based upon what he developed. He also did some things with licensure, and we'll talk about licensure here in a few minutes. In 1959, he actually started one of the first ATEPs, athletic training education programs. And at the time, you have to understand it was not a curriculum program. It was associated with another form, either through a PE department or a biology department or through human performance, those kinds of things. And when I say human performance, dance and recreation were not connected to PE until the late 1980s. So That's how that came about. But in 1959, he started the athletic training program at UNM. He had 5 students at the time, and there were only three other schools. It was Iowa State, Indiana State, and I think it was Oregon.
And there's Toe.
He is standing in front of the LF Toe Diem athletic facility at UNM. It was named in his honor. Before this building was built, we had a little place called the South Complex. There were athletics on this side, and then there was the athletic training room on this side, and then a long dark hallway. And then upstairs was all the athletic facilities. My first venture into that room back in the late 1970s. When I walked into the room, we had tables along one wall, and then there was equipment. And one of the first things I saw was a machine called a Cybex. It was actually made by Fitron Corporation. It was one of the first Cybex in the United States. It was a beast to work with, but it was a lot of fun.
Medieval.
Medieval, yeah.
So we move on down south to New Mexico State University, and George Westbrook was hired. Actually, Tom and George both were finishing up. Tom worked football, George worked basketball. Lou Henson became the athletics director, worked basketball. He chose the guy that he worked with. He chose Tom over George, or George over Tom, excuse me, in 1968. So George became the head athletic trainer, and George is another huge figure. I got legends because Toe and George are absolutely the 2 biggest people in the history of New Mexico athletic training. At the same time, the Pan American Center got built. Okay, and so instead of a little tiny athletic training facility in Williams Gym or in old Memorial Gym, if you guys know where the tower is, where Health and Social Services is, that was the end. That was a tower at the back of the stands for the old football stadium, if you go on campus. But so he was able to move into the athletic training facility that was, for a few of you guys, in the Pan American Center, the fully remodeled. And he was the athletic trainer from 1968 to 1981, so a pretty darn long time. George was very well respected too. Very intelligent man. I met him a few times when I got here in '89, and he was leaving town soon after that. But a lot of stories about George. But he left as the head athletic trainer in '81, not to go to another place, but to start the program. And he moved down to the physical education and College of Education to start a program. Well, when you start a program, at that time, we are talking about curriculums and stuff like that, and it takes a while to go. So even though, you know, the program started in '81, the first classes really didn't start till the mid-'80s.
It was 85.
Okay. And that's that was close. And our first graduate wasn't until 1989, because you had to start at the beginning and finish. Now, we had many graduates before that, but they got degrees, and I'm going to point out some of our earlier graduates. They had degrees in other fields. They did not get athletic training education degrees like you guys are all getting, okay? A little different. I don't know if he finished his undergrad here. I know he got his master's here. I think he got his PhD here. But he was tenured faculty, and he got tenured faculty in about 4 years, and that's not something that happens very quick. It's usually 7?
6.
Okay, so a really smart guy. He had applied for med school. He had some disabilities, and he feels that that's why he didn't get in, but I wasn't there, I can't tell you. But very intelligent guy, okay? And there's George in his prime. I need to tell you, this is kind of a somber note, that actually George passed away last week. He'd been living in Texas, and I believe still kind of practicing. He moved to Alabama and worked for a while after he left Las Cruces. He worked in Texas too, but he passed away last Tuesday. So, here's to you, George. One of the things that George had to do, and a little bit Tom, a little before him, was to repair some community relations. Warren Woodson was an incredibly popular and a successful coach, but he was not an easy guy to work with. At the time, Campus Health Center would have nothing to do with our athletes. They wouldn't touch our athletes because of Warren Woodson. And George mended fences, and he got a lot of different people on board to help us. Morton Leonard was no orthos in town at that time. Las Cruces isn't big enough to have an orthopedic surgeon at this time. So you got to think of scale here. He went down and struck up a relationship with Morton Leonard, really respected guy in El Paso. And so here's the deal. Game on Saturday, come home, probably get home on Sunday. It's not like you're chartering a flight or anything. You're bussing most of the time. And on Monday, he packs up the van and they drive down all the sick, lame, and lazy, as Dr. Baker likes to say, down to El Paso, okay, for triage. You know, your 6 worst guys, because the van probably only holds 6, you take down to Dr. Leonard every Monday. And that's what he did. But he started relationships with other medical professionals in town. James Tucker was a dentist and holds a special place in my heart and many people's heart. He started working with NMSU, and he only helped us for 50 years, so he's kind of a short timer, but he retired several years ago. But George did a great job of bringing Las Cruces and El Paso practitioners back in and help the Aggies, and it was huge. He had a few assistants along the way. George Foster, who still lives in Las Cruces today, and Bob Moore. And at one point, he had 2 assistants and a GA. And that's more than when I got here. When I got here, we had 1 assistant and 1 GA. He left the program in '89 to start private practice. And you guys own the building that he started there off of, what is that?
Ball drive.
Ball, yeah.
Ball drive.
Yeah, and for several years he had a physical therapy practice or a rehab practice here in Las Cruces. He moved after that and moved to Alabama and then Texas. Okay, this is history. I got this at like 3 o'clock this afternoon from George Foster. All right, so that is George Foster. That is Bob Moore. Those are the 2 assistants for George at the time. This is George. He had polio, so he had a little different gait and stature to him. Oh, you can't do that. For those of you counting at home, this is a young Leah McCowan. You might know her as Leah Putman, but that's Leah as a student at NMSU. I don't have the exact date, but I'm pretty sure it's 77 or 78, because I know most of the staffs during that time. Don't ask me how I know. I wasn't here. But this may or may not be their grad assistant. I'm not quite sure. I'll ask you guys later about pictures and let me know. But anyway, those 2 guys were huge. Toe and George were huge. And not only at their respective schools, but statewide. They were respected. They were the guys, we'll talk about later, that helped bring about state licensure. It was their influence and the respect they had that made legislators listen and say, hey, this isn't a bad idea, maybe we ought to do this. Okay, but George did leave, so that left a void for NMSU, and so Ed Sutherland came in. And George came from Texas and Odessa, and so did Ed. Little pipeline there. He was the head athletic trainer for 4 years, and he had several assistants. Individually, Jim and then Scott. Scott is now at Drake and has been at Drake University for a million years. Yeah, something like he left here and been to Drake University. We played Drake 2 years ago or something like that in a game, and he came back 5. They did have some help. We had an athletic trainer that was an assistant volleyball coach, Mary Waziski. She's on our alumni page. I've never met her in person, but she's on our alumni page. But on the side, she did have athletic training skills. She was certified. She was, at that time, preferred being a coach, so she was an assistant coach / athletic trainer. Guess what sport she worked as a volleyball coach? You can probably figure that one out. But they did have GAs from time to time. Leah was one, Lee Lookingbill,
Redinger,
yeah, and a few other folks. Ed is significant because he was named to the first NMATA Executive Committee. And that now is the leading, the NMATA board, basically, okay? Our state organization. And that happened in '83, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But as the vice president and being in the South, and we said, hey, we have to have an annual meeting. And so the few people here know that if you live in the area where the meeting's going to be, that means it's going to be your meeting, right, Joe?
That's why if you're the vice president, you're in charge of the convention, so that's also.
But he set up the first annual meeting. We have a meeting almost every year. We don't have a meeting this year per se because we have RMATA, right? So we'll have our meeting during RMATA, but when we have our state meetings, here in Las Cruces last year, there was a little party that went along with that. In 1983, we had it in Elephant View. It would be kind of a fun place. We were thinking that might be a good place to go back to just to celebrate. One of these days, we might have to do that. We'll have to work on it.
We'll work on it.
Joe. So, as a treat, I got you a few. Okay, Tori, you're on the spot. Who's that gentleman right there?
My dad.
There's your dad, exactly. See, it wasn't that stressful.
How do you like your shorts?
That's what everybody wore at that time. It's not just like,
Can we get those?
You're lucky they weren't white.
if you can find Tony McClure in town, you can get those. Because Tony McClure has a stash of them, right? Anyway. Okay. Bruce Tencio. This is Ed Sutherland. This is Scott Kerr. This is Morton Leonard, the team physician. I don't know some of these other people. David Salice and Bonnie Kessler. Bonnie is a graduate of our program who married a physical therapist. They run a big rehab center down in El Paso. They do a lot of things for athletic training and the Sun City Athletic Trainers Association, the El Paso Athletic Trainers. And she's going to be inducted in there. She and her husband are getting a service award at their annual banquet here in a couple of weeks for all the stuff they do for them. So, leaders, talking leaders here. Ed left, and he left right before two-a-days again. It's just a pattern that happened here.
That's my plan.
Okay. That's not a good pattern. Anyway, they started two-a-days without an athletic trainer, and the senior and sophomore and junior athletic trainers kind of ran the show, and that's kind of what you did back then. You do what you got to do. But they found a great guy in Ricky Mendini. Ricky had just graduated from the University of Arizona. If you know anything about athletic training in the West, the master's degree that people got at the U of A was a huge stepping stone to head athletic trainer jobs in college. If you go back to the 80s and 90s and see who were athletic trainers, mostly in the West, well over half of them got their masters at U of A. It's just what you did. You got that and boom, you went out and got a job as an athletic trainer in a college. It just was a huge pipeline. And Gary Delforge and a few other folks ran that program. And it was a pretty darn good program. That is a who's who. We're not talking about Arizona athletic training today, but if you look at those graduates, it's a who's who and Hall of Famers in their state, district, and national levels. And Ricky was one of those. He was the first athletic trainer to have the title of assistant athletic director, and I'm the second. But all that meant was a little more administrative duties. It's not like we got to pay for that one. At the time, if you'll remember that George had 2 assistants and a GA, times were a little tougher in the 80s. And so 1 assistant and 1 GA. Ken Smith was his first assistant, and he had a couple of GAs. Oh boy, I'm forgetting names right now. I can't think of them. But anyway, when Ken left, I graduated from NAU, and I was looking for a job, and hey, they hired me. 1981. Oh yeah, Jeff Pleasant. I'm sorry. Jeff Pleasant was the first GA, and then Ellen Epping, who ended up is now the program director at Central Arkansas. Sandy Scruggs sells T-shirts in Ruidoso. Go Dirty Dog T-shirts in Ruidoso. And Claire Ashburn just went off and became a physician, no big deal. He's a doctor now, here in town. But he had a good staff. Relied heavily on athletic training students at the time. This was a different time, where there was a little more unsupervised experience. Let's just leave it. Reagan, is that good? Fair enough? Okay, I got to point out a couple things in this picture before you start saying, oh, this is a spring game. It's before everybody gets there. And if you've ever gone to one of our spring games, that's not many. Okay? We're so broke at this time, we can't afford stickers on our helmets.
It's like today.
Yeah, I wanted to point out the Where's Waldo marching band. Get it? Somebody, please. Get it? Okay. All right. Moving on to the rest of the staff at UNM. I'll let Tim talk about that.
Larry Willock started as a student athletic trainer in 1965. In 1988, he was one of the first students to take the certification exam. In the nation. This exam involved two parts. There was a written and then there was an oral. And then in 2006, he was one of the last proctors of the certification exam, which was held in Denver. He is involved with the NMATA and the RMATA. He's in the RMATA Hall of Fame, and that was in 1992. And he was inducted into the NMATA Hall of Fame in 2000. He was preceded by another student, Wayne Barger, who is the current president for the RMATA, now lives in Durango. But Wayne Barger was actually the head athletic trainer at Albuquerque Academy, and
Recent UNM grad.
he was a UNM grad. Actually, Wayne and I graduated together. Then he took over for Larry, who then went off to the Air Force Academy, then ended up in Colorado College, and then just recently retired about 3 years ago. Wayne Barker was there as the interim. In 1994, there was no space to hire from within, so we found Wayne sitting around at Albuquerque Academy doing nothing, so we hired him at UNM. Dave Binder, for those of you that don't know, Dave Binder was actually a former athletic trainer at UTEP, and he actually has a couple of his children were going to UNM. I don't know why they went to UNM and not to UTEP. But to be closer to his family, he took the job at UNM. He was there until 2005, and then Bob Waller took over.
So he's the current athletic trainer there. Real briefly, because I don't have a lot of information on athletic trainers in other universities and colleges in the state, but I want to point out a couple things. Bill Joy was the first athletic trainer in eastern New Mexico in 1966, and that's, if you look at some of the other dates, that's a little early. So good for Portales. They got it going early. I couldn't tell you who has been afterwards, but I'm working on it.
But I can tell you that Bill Joy was a UNM grad.
And he was very active too, and was
Especially in our state
served on the
licensure.
board and licensure, so
Right.
he was a good help. New Mexico Highlands up in Las Vegas. Tom Shackelford was the first in '79, and then Rob Evers, an NAU grad, took over. He came from NAU and then worked at the high schools in Albuquerque and moved up to the college level and spent quite a good time there, 82 to 96. And we do a lot of administrative stuff. Athletic trainers are problem solvers. It's what we do. And so Rob got a big problem because he had to become the AD. And the movie The Vow, if you look at have you ever seen the movie The Vow? I think this up in RMATA?
Yes.
Okay. Rob was the athletic trainer for the coach in that movie. I won't say too much more because there was a big talk up in Albuquerque, but he's very special to the main people in that movie because of who he is and what he did. But Rob's a great guy, and he, for his service, was inducted in the NMATA and the RMATA Hall of Fame. Okay, and Liz took out after them, and then there's a few others, one after another kind of deal. Western's a little sketchy. I talked to Mike McMillan the other day, and Rick Lemke was there as a head athletic trainer and a student before that, and he knew that Wayne Sunby was the first guy he knew of, so that's what's up on the slide. New Mexico military, we're not sure of names, but in the 70s they started having actual athletic trainers instead of coaches doing it, and whoever could help. And later on, Jose Barron was an NMSU grad, went over there and started in 2003, and again, because we're problem solvers and we take care of problems, he was moved to athletics director a couple of years ago. So I don't know if he's happy about that or not. So this is an area I really do want to spend a little time, because again, leaders in the country. Doniana, back then, back in the 70s, we're talking about Las Cruces High School, Mayfield High School, and Gadsden High School. There aren't any others, really. And we had certified athletic trainers when that's just not the norm at the time. That's just not what people did. But 3 high schools in this area and all had certified athletic trainers. That's pretty phenomenal. And before Albuquerque ever got their thing going, which is great, they were one of the leaders in 1979. People were up in Washington. I heard about Albuquerque. Hey, man, they had a high school athletic trainer in every high school. That's really cool. But we rocked it long before they did. Okay? So, at Gadsden in 1977, John Froggy Barnes.
Joe. Froggy Barnes.
I'm sorry. It's Joe. You're right. This was one of my late things. Kind of hurried today. Joe Froggy Barnes started in 1977, and Joe came from El Paso and UTEP. So again, sometimes the college wasn't paying so great, and high school wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but that's still the case today. He did a lot of good things. He established an athletic training program at Gadsden and was there for several years, followed briefly by Jose Scott, and then another legend in southern New Mexico, Alan Russell. Alan was a graduate of University of Arizona, again, right? And eventually got here, a couple of years removed from that, got here and to Gadsden, and only stayed from 81 to 99. Are those right? Is that pretty close? Okay. So he was here for a while. Alan is an amazing organized guy. If you wanted to look up organized under the dictionary, there's a picture of Alan Russell. They could tell stories, but he used to number the Band-Aids. He used to number the Band-Aids.
The only thing bad I got to say about Alan Russell is I went down to Gadsden for a varsity football game, and for some reason my students didn't pack my kit correctly, and we had to borrow a 4-inch wrap. I got number 13. I didn't think it was a 4-inch wrap. Nobody thinks about that. About 3 weeks later, I get a bill from Gadsden High School.
Roll number 13.
For $2.75 for 4-inch elastic bandage, number 13.
So any of you guys that have had experiences at Gadsden, it's not the richest school district in the area, and it's not great, but he made do with what he had. He saved and took care of what he had, and as a result, well, before I go on, David here followed in those footsteps, and Joe was his assistant for a while, and now Joe has the reins there. One of the things about Gadsden that's pretty unique is that for a good chunk of time, they had a full-time assistant. And we're talking about in the 80s, and that just wasn't the norm, to have 2 certified athletic trainers in one place, but that's a pretty neat thing. This is off the 1978 Gadsden yearbook, and that is Mr. Frank Munoz right there, and that is good old Froggy Barnes. And he's Joe. Sorry, Joe. Back to Mr. Russell. He was so organized that at this point, the Kramer First Aider is the source for athletic training news in the country and the world, basically. Kramer Company published this thing on a monthly basis.
At that time it was, yeah.
Regionally or quarterly or something like that. But he's the front page story. Gadsden High School's facility and his organization is a front page story of the 1990 Kramer First Aider. That's They didn't even know where Gadsden was, but they knew about this stuff. So it just tells you, he was pretty amazing in the things he did. Other areas, like I said, Las Cruces, Mayfield, and Gadsden were the big ones. 75, way back in 75, we had an athletic trainer in Las Cruces High School. You weren't born there yet, Rob. But you got there. But you got there. Bill Kennedy was only for a few years. He was followed by UNM grad.
Rich Gerald's then left from Las Cruces High and went to Albuquerque High, up in Albuquerque, and we'll talk about Rich in a few minutes as well. Bob Moore left from New Mexico State and then took over as the assistant, came over to Las Cruces High School. And then Brent Jaquist,
Roswell.
He's a Roswell person, but he was one of our grads from the athletic programs. He then left athletic training, became an assistant football coach, worked with Jim Miller for quite a few years, and then now is the head football coach at Onate High School.
Dark side.
Yeah,
Not that he's
dark side.
not that he's a football.
Some guy named Daryl Wooten.
He had a couple years there.
He was only there for a few years. Nobody really knows anything about
94
him.
to 13. And then Anita came in as one of Daryl's students as an undergrad or as a high school student. She was one of Daryl's, went to Boston University, and then came back for a little stint before she got into med school.
Yeah, she's a med school.
Med school. And now we got Rob. So it's been a nice lineage, and it's been some pretty amazing people. The assistants in Las Cruces Public Schools aren't as fortunate. They don't have full-time.
In the very beginning, in 1977 through 1979, there were both male and female athletic trainers at both Las Cruces High and Mayfield High School. The assistant athletic trainer for Richard Gerald is Michelle Ponce, who is now our assistant athletic director. So that's something, she has a little connection with that. When Steve Theo took the job in 1976, his assistant was Diane Garcia, who now works as a physical therapist up in Albuquerque at Thunderbird Physical Therapy.
I'll let you run with me.
Okay, you think?
Yeah.
Kai Kugler took over in 1978. He went to 1984, actually went to the spring of 1985. He was working on his master's and he needed some time to work on his master's full time. So my school that I was at in Houston had actually been shut down, and I was looking for a job. I called Toe, and if he didn't know anything about anything in the state, he called Toe anyway. And he said, hey, there's a guy down in Las Cruces that needs a position. He says, let me give you the phone number to Rex Hennington, who is our athletic director at the time. He said, yeah, I need a position to cover baseball from spring break on until we get to the championships, and unfortunately they did go to the championship. My head football coach was Bob Ogas, who ended up being an assistant principal, and then he then hired me to be the full-time athletic trainer, even though I was there all day long. Bob then went from being the assistant principal to being the head principal, and then he left in early 2010. After I left, I let one of my former students, who was an NMSU grad, take over for me, Tracy. And she's still there. I don't know why, but she still is. One of my former athletes is sitting in the crowd. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being an athletic training student. And I got Kim. Kim was an assistant. Tanya was an assistant. Joe was an assistant. Andy was an assistant.
Who wasn't in the room?
Come on. Typically, the athletic trainers that, and we're going to go to Onate next, typically when it happened is that when you were an assistant for me, you typically took over as the head position at Onate. So if you go to the next one.
This was our clinical, some of our clinical instructors at the time, 1976. So,
Michael.
now this is Mr. Alan Russell, the myth, man, the myth, the legend. Tim there, Daryl there, for those scoring at home. Our assistant program director at the time was Angie Mickle, who's now at Radford University program director. Colleen was my assistant. Rob was my grad assistant And that's me with the stash, walk, rock. And Frank Munoz has been many things. He was a student in that Gadsden yearbook. He was a undergrad student up at New Mexico Highlands. He worked at, I forget now.
He worked at Gadsden.
Worked at Gadsden as an assistant, Canutillo, Santa Teresa currently. So Frank is still in the business and been there a long time. But a good
Frank
group.
was a high school
Just
student.
burgers, no beers.
Yeah. We're in, yeah.
When Frank was a high school student back then, he attended a Kramer Student Trainer Clinic, and my job as the senior at the Student Athletic Trainer Clinic was to teach the anatomy and also teach the strapping and taping and those kinds of things, and also regulate who goes and covers what sports, because we were covering the state champion or the all-star football game and basketball game, volleyball game, and soccer games at the time. Frank was one of my students, and I really didn't recognize him until a couple of years later we met, and he reminded me that I was not a nice guy when I was a
He
kid.
probably didn't have the stash when he was
No,
a
he
student.
didn't. He was a little younger then.
Yeah. But a good crew, and we did a lot of hard work to make the program good back in the time, believe it or not. Oñate opened up in '89, and so they needed an athletic trainer, and they took, these are all grads of our program for a while at least. Linda graduated about 87, 88.
She was an assistant for me for
Ralph was an 88 grad. Mike St. John followed him for a year. Tammy Atkinson, an athletic trainer and softball player, was there for several years. Stan Curley followed her. And then Jim Chapacon came from Santa Teresa High School up to Oñate, moved to the big town of Las Cruces, where he took over athletic director position, left a spot for one of our graduate assistants, Omar Furcha. And then Blazer Blaze isn't here today, but he holds down that fort right now. The short story of Centennial High School is it's been open since 2000.
That's how old That's not how old the school is.
Exactly. He sends us condolences. He said he couldn't come tonight. He said he would say
whatever.
bad things about him. But Daryl, after leaving Las Cruces for all those years, moved to Centennial and is hanging on still. So those are the local high schools that have athletic trainers and some pretty good people. We got to move on now to some of the state organization and licensure and stuff. But the New Mexico Athletic Trainers Association needed to happen. We wanted to have state licensure. We had a whopping 35 athletic trainers in the state at this time, and there's people in different parts, believe it or not, not just Las Cruces and Albuquerque, but there were people in Cortales and in Silver and other places. And we didn't have a place where we could all get together and meet like this. We didn't have that. And so they formed the New Mexico Athletic Trainers Association in January of 1983. And some of the leading proponents of that would have been Toe and George and Larry and Ed at the time,
And Bill Joy.
and Bill Joy at Eastern. And they said, this is what we need to do. Because athletic trainers, by nature, we want to get together with other athletic trainers. You know, it's not a competitive thing, and hey, I've got this great secret, and I'm going to keep it from you guys, so we win. We don't do that. We share. And so it was a chance to get together and sometimes break down some barriers. There's a UNM, NMSU barrier at times, and there was a pretty good one going at that time.
At that time, it was pretty good.
And we got to knock this nonsense off and start working together as a group and collectively pool our resources. And so that's kind of what they did.
So the first annual symposium actually was in July of 1983. I was working in Houston at the time. I came home for summer. My parents and my wife's parents both lived in Albuquerque, so we came home with a brand new baby to show off our brand new daughter. I called the athletic training room just to check in with Toe to let him know I was in town, and he told me to pack my bags and, in no uncertain terms, get to Elephant Butte this weekend. And I didn't know what was going on, So I called a friend of mine, his name is Mark Hogan, he's the athletic trainer at Valley High School. Was in town visiting his parents because he was working for the Pirates at the time. And so we got together in his truck and we drove down to Elephant Butte, not knowing that it was at a hotel and not having hotel reservations. So we had a tent and we had just some simple stuff for food and camping, and so we laid out on the beach. We ended up going to the meeting, and it's a professional meeting, folks. You don't wear shorts to a professional meeting. Toe was not very happy with us, and so we had to stand in the back of the room. And we could not be in the picture because we were wearing shorts.
Now, again, that was set up by Ed Sutherland.
Ed Sutherland
Rich
and
Gerald.
Rich Gerald, who
Cruces
is
at
at
the time.
he went from Cruces High to Albuquerque High.
And so we got that going, and that kind of led, getting a bunch of all the athletic trainers in the state together, saying, hey, we need to get this licensure thing. We need a legal identity in the state. It just had started happening. Indiana had one, maybe a couple others had one.
New Jersey was right.
But they said, the leaders, Toe, George, a few others, said, we need to do this. We need to get together, get organized, and become a licensed state. So Toe tried in 1980. He hit up a few of his friends because, if you remember, when he retired, he became the a fundraiser, an AD, and a lobbyist. So he knew all the people in Santa Fe. And if you know New Mexico politics, a lot of people that graduate from UNM, law school, med school, are in politics versus New Mexico State, ag and engineering. Okay, so it leans their way. So he was very influential, and he had talked to a couple legislators in 1980, but it didn't fly. Not bad, that's okay. So Raymond Sanchez, you need to tell us.
Raymond Sanchez was actually at UNM getting his law degree and was rooming with an athlete. And he was an avid tennis player, and he was out playing tennis one afternoon and sprained his ankle real bad. Got back to the dorm room, and his friend told him, says, you know, you need to go down and see Toe. And you need to have Toe take a look at your ankle and find out what's going on.
So he's not an intercollegiate athlete, he's a
He's
recreational.
just recreational, and so his friend takes him down to Johnson Gym, down to the athletic training room, and introduces him to Toe Diem. After that point, they basically became really good friends. Raymond Sanchez got his law degree, ended up being a state legislator. He was on the finance committee and on the jurisprudence committee. He was going to he wanted to assist with Toe's bill, and basically told them, then this is Toe and George, who are up in Santa Fe trying to get our licensure done, and basically told them in a room, look, neither one of you can have anything to do with this bill because we don't want that UNM New Mexico State thing going on. So you guys have to stay completely out of it. But you have to have an association because we can't have a state law if you don't have a bunch of people working together to get this thing going. So they got Larry Willock to be the first president, and Ed Sutherland became the first vice president.
So UNM and MSU.
And MSU. But because they were assistants at the time, they were left out and they weren't connected with the university. But because Toe and George really had their names written on the universities that they were working with. They got Kiki Saavedra, who was on the finance committee, which helped. And they also had another beautiful young lady by the name of Mary Tucker, who was the Democrat representative for Diana County. And with Mary and Kiki actually helped push through the bill. Raymond couldn't do it because he was Speaker of the House at the time. And you can't have the Speaker of the House raise up and go, hey, I want to have this bill.
They're way too busy.
Yeah.
So the bill did get presented, and if you know anything about politics, there's always going to be someone that opposes any bill that comes up. It's just the way it is. And with the New Mexico Athletic Training License Bill, not too surprising, the physical therapist said, I don't know if we want to give our slice of the pie away. And the high school administrator said, you guys going to make us all hire athletic trainers? I don't think we want to do that.
Well, one of the things in the licensure law, for those of you who are getting ready to take it, there is nothing in this bill that should state that a high school or that a school is required to hire an athletic trainer. And that was put in because of the superintendent's the school districts didn't want to be forced into doing athletic training or hiring an athletic trainer.
Yeah.
But in the House, it passed -3 votes, and in the Senate, it passed unanimously.
And no bill gets that.
Nobody
No bill
gets
gets passed like that.
unanimous.
But one of the reasons was that Don Maynard was a former NFL player. He played for the Jets in the Super Bowl, Joe Namath Super Bowl. And I don't think, have the Jets been to another one?
I don't think so.
And he was a resident of New Mexico. And he had a young son that had a severe neck injury in a football game. And he saw what an athletic trainer did to save his son. And he stepped on the House floor, because when there's a bill like this, it's open for discussion. And you can have people come and say good things and bad things about it. And he went out and gave a very impassionate speech about the value of athletic trainers and how important it was and how it saved his son's life. And it went from, I don't know, to, oh, hell yes, we're doing this. And
His son played for West Mesa, and they were actually playing West Mesa and Albuquerque, so both Rich Geralds and Ron Muir at the time were at the game, and that's where that came about.
Yeah. So, it passes. Tony and I passes it and signs it into law in '83, in April of '83. It goes into effect in June, and we were maybe 3rd or 4th in the country, again, leaders in the country with licensure. Now look at California. Let's look at California, huh? California guys here. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Colorado may drop their licensure right now. They're talking about not having licensure anymore. And we're going strong. Going strong. So when you have a licensure bill or a license, you have to have some sort of a board that regulates that. And the governor names that board. You've been on that board.
I am on the board.
Oh, you're on the board, yeah. You've been on the board, I've been on the board. It's a political thing, but there are, they separate it out, so there is a athletic trainer from a high school, at least one, athletic trainer from a college, at least one, north of I-40, south of I-40, and then one more.
There's an independent athletic trainer.
And then there are a couple of public members, okay? And so, just as a throwback, that's Kiki Saavedra. That's his office before he retired and as the Speaker of the House.
This is before he retired for Speaker of the House. And the reason why this gentleman's picture is there is because Kiki and Toe were extremely good friends. I took this picture with Kiki, and he made sure that our heads were away from the picture so that we could see Toe. And both of us are very passionate about that gentleman on the top.
But this stuff just doesn't happen by chance. It doesn't, you know. It's relationships that we build with people we take care of, whether they're our athletes or they're people that come in from outside in the community. And George Westbrook did the same thing. He built a huge following because he took care of local people in Las Cruces. And that's what happens because of it. We have a licensure bill, and we have state legislators and leaders in the state legislators that are fighting for us. We got one there now that's the chief of staff for the governor.
And he's an NMSU grad.
He's an Aggie, and he's an athletic training grad. Anyway, so they did name the first advisory board, and so we'll name some names here. This is Mr. Joy from Eastern New Mexico. Oh, geez. Wrong button. Oh, now I'm really screwed up. That's Rich Gerald. So he wrote a lot of the rules of our NMATA, right?
Well,
you tread light.
all right, tread lightly. In 1982, they were working on trying to get the association together. And one of the things they came up with was they needed to find a way to get rules and regulations, so we have a Bill of Rights, and then we also had a Constitution, because at the time we were not an LLC, and we were not a 503B. So before that, we had a Constitution and a Bill of Rights. Well, we had an athletic training or student athletic training association at UNM, and I happened to be president at the time. And Rich had asked us, do we have Bill of Rights and Constitution for the student association? I said yes, which was interesting because at the time I was also on the board of directors for a religious group, and I stole their constitution, and then Rich and I changed the names and changed the wording, And then Rich then evaporated some of the things that were in there that were not pertinent to athletic training. And that's where our Constitution came from. Rich was instrumental in helping with the design of the RMATA logo. He was also very instrumental in getting all the athletic trainers across the state to be involved with athletic training. So our first athletic training board was Rich Gerald's, and then we have Kai Kugler, who was at Mayfield High School.
NMSU grad.
NMSU grad. Down below, Kai is Bev, and she was the executive secretary. That was Viola. She's from Santa Fe, but she worked in a hospice clinic. This is Toby Trujillo. He started a little place called Sports Shack in Espanola, for those of you that know the lovely town of Espanola. It didn't do very well, but he ended up purchasing a company out of Albuquerque, and you may know it as Garden Sports. So that Toby was involved with that. And then this is Beverly Quinn. It's actually Quinlan, not Quintana. She was executive secretary. She was the first female athletic trainer, certified athletic trainer at UNM.
And probably the first one in the state, unless we beat her down here.
I don't think so.
So the board, again, is appointed by the governor, and there's 5 certified athletic trainers. Sorry, Mr. Richardson, you can't have your personal trainer on the board. He tried. We didn't let him. And then 2 public people, and generally the public people have some idea of athletics and sports and wellness so that they can work with us to do what we have to do. Okay, we're winding down, guys. It's almost 9 and we're winding down. I wanted to impress upon you that NMSU specifically, we've been talking about the state of New Mexico, and there's been leadership and firsts and leading the country kind of stuff. But I want to give you a quick snapshot of some of our alumni and some of the things they've done. Arnold Thomas was the gentleman that actually called me with George Westbrook's passing. Arnold was an athletic trainer when he graduated here, went to Houston, worked in a high school, the same high school, for 30 years, retired a couple years ago, and for that, the NATA said, that's worth a prize. He was inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2012. So an Aggie went in the Hall of Fame there. Kai, as we were talking about, was on the first board. He was a graduate. He has 3 degrees from MSU, actually, Las Cruces native. And he graduated undergrad, first degree in '78. Just 2 years ago, he was named one of the NATA most distinguished athletic trainers. And he runs the program over at Chapman College in California. Leah was a graduate and a grad assistant here at MSU, graduated undergrad in '78. She is in one of the only female in the New Mexico Athletic Trainer Hall of Fame, and the first Aggie in the NMATA Hall of Fame.
Correct.
So Leah is still an administrator?
She's still the assistant principal athletic coordinator at Del Norte High School.
Yeah, she's gone to the dark side too, so she's not an athletic trainer anymore, but did a lot of good things. Missy Archibek, I know a couple people in the room know Missy. Missy was a graduate of '92. Missy is a tireless worker for athletic trainers up in Albuquerque. She is in her element. She retired from athletic training several years ago, but she continues to serve on the NMAA board, so that's the Activity Association, as the first and only liaison that's an athletic trainer. So the NMAA has done some dumb things to hurt athletic training, and now we have a voice because Missy's there fighting for us every day. She received the NMATA Distinguished Service Award a couple years ago, and is also an NMAA service, and she's a great partner and loves Jimmy Buffett beyond words. Tate Strickland was a '94 grad. Is currently the head athletic trainer at Central Arkansas Cebu. Okay, not for Dave, but for Central Arkansas.
He's an awesome guy.
Yeah, he is an amazing guy from Carlsbad. Just was last year, 2 years ago, something like that. I can't remember now. My years are off. But he received an NATA Service Award, a National Service Award. Some pretty amazing people.
He's also in the Arkansas Athletic Trainers Association.
Yes, he
Hall
is.
of Fame.
He is.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But
Well, it would be if you know who the company is.
so I've been researching this, and I've got a lot of pictures. And this one just popped up. This is before I got here, but I know almost all these people because they were either still hanging around or came back afterwards. So this is a sample shot, if you will, of some of our athletic trainers and the recurring students at the time. Just a quick brief thing. She's a PhD. She runs an aquatic center. He's a PA that works with the busiest sports ortho in Phoenix. Head athletic trainer to the Diamondbacks right there. Head athletic trainer to the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. Physical therapist up in Albuquerque, just a great guy. He was our assistant program director when I got here. Alan Cooksy's got a shit-eating grin for sure, but very good guy. An athletic trainer, has worked in many different places, worked for Southwest Sports Fine and is currently down in El Paso. This gentleman is a lifelong Major League Baseball athletic trainer. He's currently the assistant, or he's the AAA athletic trainer for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. Dave was the assistant for Arizona Diamondbacks for many, many years, now works for PBR. Anybody who wants PBR, he's a good guy to meet. I don't know where Sheila is. I have no idea what this lady is. I just don't know her at all. I know everybody else, but I don't know Kim, I don't think, pursued athletic training. Sometimes that happens. They graduate with our program, from our program, and they just don't go on. It happens. Mark sponsored dinner one day and he's kind of the PR guy for Mountain View. He's a marketing guy. His job is to get the new physicians and all the services Mountain View provides out into the public and out to the doctors, a few doctors that aren't affiliated with one of the medical centers here in Las Cruces. And he's done very well for them. Wow, I know a lot of those guys and they've done really well. You know, so you don't have to win national awards, regional awards. You just do your job and do well. We thought we'd throw this up, and you guys are working on it, but this is the Hall of Fame in our state. So the first time we decided to have a Hall of Fame is 1990. Guess who was the first guy?
The reason why we waited till 1990, remember we started in 1983, is they needed a minimum of 15 years, but in our bylaws it says you have to be a member for 20 years. We decided to forego that because Toe had been in the state since 1956. So that was the reason, and he was involved with the membership at the time. Even though when he was inducted, he had already passed away in 1989 or 88. But to show our reverence to Toe, they put him in as the first athletic trainer for the Hall of Fame. Larry Willock was done in 2000. He was an assistant as well as the head athletic trainer at UNM. Ron Muir, he had served two separate terms as vice president and was also Northern rep. He was inducted in 2004. Rich Gerald, who was a past president, had served on Larry Willock's board as being the Northern representative. Rob Evers from Sandia High School had served as president for 2 terms. Both Rich Gerald and Rob Evers both served 2 full terms as president, which ended up being kind of the norm now. Leah Renninger from Del Norte, even though she was the first Aggie, they hold her as a UNM person, so, you know, whatever.
She lives in Albuquerque, that's all. She's in
I was inducted in 2013. I served two terms as president, and for up until that time, it was 28 years. Out of the 28 years, I had served on the board for 24 of them. So the reason I got in it, I think, was because they just wanted to get rid of me. Rex Buller was inducted in 2014 in Aztec. Rex Buller was the athletic trainer at Del Norte High School. He is now he just teaches sports medicine and teaches health.
He served on many boards and
He served as vice president for 1 term. He served as he co-sponsored 3 of the meetings of the NMATA at Del Norte High School. And then Michael Leary was inducted in 2015, well deserved by
Now they're scraping the bottom, but the point being that it's service. I was a Southern rep a couple times. I did a little stint as the newsletter, district newsletter. I failed miserably at that. I served on the license board too. And that's the point, is that we all have busy jobs and we have a lot of stuff on our plate, but the whole thing in athletic training is you give more. You go out to the community. You volunteer for Gus Macker or whatever it is. The Baton Death March. You were there, weren't you, Dave?
It was there.
Baton. You guys were there. Yeah. They didn't pay you, right? You just do that. It's what you do. As athletic trainers, that's what we do. We go out and that's how we show people who we are. It's great to tell people who we are, but that's how you show people who we are. So my question to you guys is, and there are many of them I know, I've already identified a few in this audience, but who's going to be the leaders of the next couple generations? So I put it on you guys to do that. And we are done.
Questions?
And it's 9 o'clock.
Question.
Exactly.
There you go.
Anybody got a question?